what's up, everyone? Welcome back to the Brando and Joe podcast. Our guest today is Amy Horner. She is currently pursuing her doctor's degree in business administration from the University of North Carolina at Charlotte. Has previous experience as the founding member of Chief, a professional speaker for innovation at Women, co-founder and podcast host of DBA Chronicles podcast, and is the founder and principal consultant of True Nine, which will be our main discussion today. Welcome, Amy. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, y'all. I'm happy to be here. That's a lengthy list. It sounds like I don't focus very well.
Well, no, it's, on the contrary, you do a lot of really cool things. It makes for a great podcast host, especially the doctor's degree. How's your semester going so far? Is it fun so?
It's going really well. Feeling calm. I know we talked about this off screen a little. Y'all just went through midterms. We don't take tests in doctoral studies, so it's a lot of writing, a lot of preparing slide decks and talking and reading. We have two more big class weekends to go this upcoming weekend. So not tomorrow, but next weekend. And then the second weekend of May. And that's it for my classroom time. Then it is no holds barred on writing dissertation. And it's just me and my thoughts for the next 12 months. So it's going to be, it'd be interesting discipline, I feel like.
Yeah, Joe and I get to chat with the PhD students in our IO programs, and hearing about that process has definitely been something somewhat eye-opening for Joe
Yeah.
and I about what we want to pursue. I know we're going to talk in bulk today about True Nine, but just a question about going for your doctorate in business. Like,
Mhm.
in that process, you said like you're not even really taking tests, you're doing a lot more of the writing and doing presentations. That sounds like
Mhm.
very like application focused. Like, is there a practical application component to getting your doctoral in business administration?
I think it really depends on what you want to do with it. So we're able to focus our studies, not completely, but a little bit. I have classmates that came into the doctorate program because they want to transition from industry as practitioners into academia as professors. So they are getting a lot of that and they can focus their studies on that. For my classmates that want to maybe move from working for a big company to consulting, they are able to spend their choice time working on the transition. It's very different to work for an organization than to be a consultant, as I think you both know. So they're
Mhm.
working on that transition, and then for people like me who came in and wanted to see what the journey was going to bring for me. Um, we get to do a little bit of both, which is nice. So I would say practical application wise, we did have to take one test, and it was statistics. It was brutal. It was a year and a half in the background for me. I can still remember how brutal it was. Um, but I would say the practical application really comes in getting to choose what you want to do and where you have the flexibility to and the creativity to do it. That's the nice part.
Do you think because you have a ton of really great previous experience, do you think that like changes your perception at all in your degree right now versus maybe some other students that didn't have as much experience? Not good or bad, but just different.
I think it really depends. It's an interesting question. So when I came into the program, I knew what I wanted to focus my dissertation on. So for the last 15 years of my career before starting True Nine, and I know we'll get into that in a little bit, I was a C-suite executive. And one of my primary responsibilities for the organizations I worked for was ushering in strategic planning, strategic change, organizational transformation. So I came into the program knowing I wanted to study strategic change. And so that is what I have focused so much of my time on. So with your question, I'm taking all that experience, but I knew I wanted to focus it on what I was working on. I had some classmates that came in that did not know what they wanted to study. They simply knew they wanted or needed a doctorate for whatever the next piece of their career was that the doctorate's going to help them get to. So I have a lot of classmates that just chose their topic really December, January of this year. And so now they're trying to apply their experience to what they want to do. Just different way to go about it.
You know, it's interesting too, like when you hear about that transition for people who go and get a PhD, and a lot more times they come in with a lot more experience, as kind of you're speaking to for yourself, Amy, to kind of transition us now more into the bulk of the episode with True Nine and talking about your experience. Uh, it's your own practice. You're the consultant there, and consulting is definitely a field that us as IO psychologists are very aware of and is very relevant to us. We just wanted to first just talk to you about what led you to just starting your own practice. What was the real driving factor for that? IO psychologists do it on a daily basis sometimes. So just to hear your perspective, I think could be really valuable.
I mentioned that I had led strategic planning and strategic change from the C suite for my previous three organizations. And when I knew in 2023 that I was going to be transitioning from the firm I had been with for a handful of years, I wasn't sure I wanted to do what I had done again. And of course, we all know that no two organizations are alike and no two projects are alike. But I wanted to do something a little bit different. And I wanted to be able to get involved with working with more people and taking creativity from more people, particularly right now, since I am focused on my doctorate and I am focused on the strategic change as my primary topic. And so this enables me to talk to more and more people about their strategies and their strategic planning while also helping them. I mean, I am here to help them. I'm not just taking from them, I'm giving too. But it just broadened my like this change is my favorite topic. When I do keynote addresses and any of my public speaking, I'm almost always talking about change. So it is my favorite topic. And this just allows me through True Nine to gather more and more like energy around change, more real world experience, more helping people and seeing what the challenges are that they're overcoming. That was that was my biggest driver behind opening my own firm versus continuing to work for a large organization.
Well, I don't think there's no better reason to start your own consulting company. It's like the perfect answer. Using your previous experience and knowing what you know and to help
Mhm.
people at your level is really great. And I know it's been recently started, but is
Mhm.
there anything you've learned along the way or lessons that you've learned, whether they were mistakes or losses that kind of helped you to become what you are now?
If I say give yourself a long runway, can you both appreciate that? And Brando is laughing, so I'm assuming yes. A lot of what I did leading up to these past 12 months, right, the transition out of corporate and opening my own organization has been or was a significant amount of networking. So I have a very large network. I have a well oiled machine network. I talk to these people. I don't just collect connections. I have great relationships with them. We exchange information and introduce each other to other people. And it has really been my network that helped me with messaging for True Nine, feedback on the website, from people who had seen me speak before. A large part of my business is public speaking and getting that feedback because it's different when you're speaking as a consultant from your own area of expertise than what it is when you're representing another organization because you're delivering a different message, but your audience also wants something different from you. So that was a big shift and tapping into my network to help make that shift not only possible, but done well. Like I would say that's a tremendous lesson learned. Whether you're maybe just about to graduate with your master's degrees and
Mm.
getting into the job market, or you're pursuing a new job, or you really, even if you move to a new area, I know so many people that have moved recently, or starting your own firm, your network is going to help you, and having a valuable network, right, a quality network versus a quantity network that can answer a lot of questions for you, introduce you to people, talk about you in rooms that you're not in. Just a tremendous piece of advice that anybody in any stage of their career I think should really take seriously. And I it's my observation that many people don't realize the value of their network until they get into a situation where they need it, and then you might be in trouble.
Yeah, that's a great answer, and it's a theme that's come up on this podcast before. It's interesting too that you're talking about like the long runway, and I feel like for people who are starting their own company or going into their own consulting firm or whatever the case is, a long runway could look different depending on your circumstances of what you need. Or for you, that long runway was probably leaning on that network.
Sure.
And so, in that, like, just a side question that kind of peaks from that, do you have any like tips or advice for students or early career professionals that could help them develop their networks? Because like you said, it's not just adding someone on LinkedIn, but it's maintaining these relationships and giving and taking and helping. But when you're young, you might not have as much to give when you're like first making these connections. So like how do people kind of build their networks from there?
I think be genuine when you're talking to people. Make sure you find common ground. Try not to talk about the weather. I have a friend that has this whole entire rant about people talking about the weather when they meet people. Like, just don't do that. It's not interesting. I appreciate that it's probably easy, but it's really not interesting. And I often say to people, different is better than better. So if you're going to a networking event or if you're introducing yourself to someone new, how are you different? And to your question, maybe younger people feel like they don't have as much to give. I would say that's maybe perception, and kind of like a self-defeating bias that younger people might have. Everyone has something very interesting. We're all unique individuals. And when you're building your network, making yourself memorable, like what makes you different? Why are you different? Brandon, we were joking about for this podcast, the N in your name is silent so that it rhymes. But that's a differentiator. That's where different is better. It's something that people remember now.
Hmm.
And if there's a room full of Brandons and you're now Brando, you have a story as to how you got there, which is different. People will remember it. And so I would say when you're starting out in networking, you're starting out building your network, make sure you're different so that people remember specifically who you are. And as you get into that network, it's a very old adage, but giving is better than receiving, or you have to give to receive. You might have to do 20 things for 20 people before any one of them has an opportunity to do something for you. And so kind of like ignoring the scoreboard, right? Like those of us who go through life keeping score are always going to find that we're on the losing end of that effort because we'll always think that something isn't fair or just or equal. So ignore the scoreboard. Make sure you're giving to your network and doing great things. And eventually that's going to come back to you.
Yeah, sorry, Joe. I wanna jump in real quick. I knew you were excited. There was one thing I wanted to add real quick. Um, I loved that piece that you were talking about making yourself memorable,
Mhm.
Amy, because I did a workshop in one of our small groups at our school in one of our programs, or in our program, and in that workshop, what I had people do was they had to not only like try and find ways that they could work in memorable pieces about themselves into conversation, but they
Mhm.
also had to try and remember the three memorable things that the other person tried to work in as well, because I think that like when you're networking, it's like a double-edged sword of not only do you have to make yourself memorable, but you have to
Mhm.
actively listen and pay attention
Mhm.
to what people are telling you. And
Mhm.
sometimes people forget about that second part. So I think
They
that
do.
is like a great piece of advice for people out there that you gave, Amy, about trying to build that network and remembering to not just like always take, but to really try and give more than you take, and also
Mhm.
practice like the differentiating yourself piece. I just wanted to throw that in really quick.
Good. I'm glad it was helpful. Poor Joe is he's ready. He's got a
Man,
question.
I was
He's
gonna make
ready.
a joke anyways. I was gonna put more in. It was I think you just outed that now a lot of people know that Brandon's name is Brandon. And now it's not Brando. So I think it was actually a great thing. It's a good thing Brandon went first. But also I wanted to make a comparison because we had a previous guest, JP Elliott, on, and we talked a lot about networking, and he said a very similar thing to what you were saying, is about giving and not always trying to get. And if I
Mhm.
remember correctly, the one thing he says is when he was going into when he was an early career practitioner, and he was like, I would send people some like articles of stuff that we were talking about, and like, look, this was like produced in research. It was like what we were talking about, and it just keeps that relationship going. So it's not always like,
Mhm.
oh, I'll see you at PsyOp on this day, and then oh, maybe I'll see you in December, and it's like you really only emailed them like twice a year, and it's like it doesn't have to be this like weekly thing, of course, but every once in a while, just like bringing something up. So it was a great comparison because I think it's like, as Brandon was saying, it's hard for us like young people to like what can we give. Um, when you're networking, I wanted to ask you another part about this, because you talked about like trying to find people like-minded and like things that were people that we can kind of gravitate towards. Have you ever like gone to certain events? I know you're a professional speaker, but more in terms of the networking side as like a listener or as like a guest, and what were those like experiences like for you? Like how did you make the most out of those?
A lot of events publish their attendee list ahead of time. So you know who will be there. And if you truly want to maximize your time, find those people that you want to talk to, or find someone that you do know, those people that you email twice a year, can introduce you to, and have a productive event. If there's no list available, or if you don't find anyone as interesting, which I would be surprised, but if there's no one that you need to talk to and you're just coming not really knowing what to expect, come up with something that differentiates you. So if you're going to give me a conference that y'all would go to, is there
PSYOP.
that's
Yeah,
psyop.
right. Sounds probably the
So we're
biggest one.
going to psyop, and what is the theme of psyops? Every conference has a theme. What's a common theme? What is the theme they would have?
Research, presenting
Yeah.
research, Brandon.
Research and
Yeah,
Presenting
networking and
research.
IO. All
drinking.
IO people.
All IO
We'll
people.
cut that out.
So you probably I didn't say it. So you probably have. We're gonna cut that out. That was funny.
I think we. Sorry, go ahead.
So with your theme, you will probably have a personal story that you will come up with for any type of conference. Let's say you're going to an Excel conference and you want to make an Excel joke, because people who love Excel really do love Excel jokes, right? There's like all these functioning circular reference jokes, which is not an actual thing. So come up with your gimmick that people are going to remember you by, and make sure that, like Brandon was saying, weave those three memorable things into the conversation. And so I do that quite a bit. I have a rule when I'm going to networking events that I refuse to ask anybody who they work for and what they do, because that isn't how we define ourselves, and that's not who we are as people. So I will ask people where they're going on vacation, or what their favorite restaurant is in the area, or if they're traveling, what did they, are they sticking around at all? What did they find most interesting about the place that they are coming to? But people, back to that differentiator of being, different is better, that talk to them, right? And I think people value that. And that's a good way to build your network, because they've probably told 15 people where they work for and what they do before you got to them and asked them whether or not they like the beach or the mountains.
It's good though. I think it's always good to think about ways to be unique in terms of networking.
Mm-hmm.
And not only that too, but I think that it's also like salient to be memorable multiple times. So it's one thing to go up and say hi to somebody. It's another to shoot them a follow-up message on LinkedIn after the fact.
Mm-hmm.
And it's another to shoot them a message a week or two later. And the more times they're seeing your name, or the more times they're seeing your name and your face, whatever that is, or wherever that is, I think will definitely benefit people out there trying to grow their networks. One thing we want to get back to in discussing True Nine with you, Amy, is like some of the experience you've had like in your program right now going for your doctorate. You kind of spoke about like how you could tailor it to being strategic for yourself.
Mm-hmm.
What is some of like the actual practice that you've been able to like see in place with like the learnings you've had and what you get to actually apply in your practice right now?
Academics study people who work in industry, right? They study practitioners, and they're looking for trends, right? So any piece of quantitative research is going to take a million data points wherever you can get it. S&P 500 data points, CompuSat, public data points. And they're going to look for trends, and they're going to try to answer whether or not their hypotheses are right or their hypotheses are wrong. So, with my dissertation, my specific topic about strategic change is the relationship between diversity characteristics on the leadership team, so the diverse makeup of an executive team, and the impact of that diversity on strategic change. So, does a variety of backgrounds, thoughts, ages, genders, every piece of diversity, does a more diverse team have better likelihood of new strategies for their organization that are helping to propel that organization forward? to take advantage of changes in technology or to avoid damage from disruption, which could also be changes in technology. Technology, back to that double-edged sword comment. I
Sure.
think if Joe says double-edged sword, we'll have tic-tac-toe and we'll be good for this podcast episode. All of that I can use when I'm talking to people about their own strategic planning, when their own not willingness to change, the piece of where people who come from different backgrounds have different views on things, and they have to be able to not be critical of one another because their views are different, but actually collaborate together to move a strategy forward. All of that, coming from what I'm studying, I'm able to use on a regular basis. I'm also able to kind of joke with both academics and practitioners because they view the world very differently. But like I said, academics are studying what people in industry have done, right? So this is not false data. So if they're coming up with something that says this combination of diversity characteristics has a negative impact on strategic planning and strategic change, like they're studying what people have done, so it's fact and it's true, and I think we have to learn from that. And so that's been an interesting piece for me of like that intersection, right? Like these two parts of my life have intersected. Now we're driving in the same place, in the same on the same path. And so it's been I think it's been a little unexpected for me. I don't know that I fully believed or realized that I could use so much of what I was studying in my day to day.
I mean, you're doing what's really hard for a lot of people is like building that bridge between the science practitioner gap. There's a gap for a reason because it's everything that we do in science is hard to transition over to what we do in like our practitioner lifestyle. And I bet you're finding that out the hard way to in your work. Um, those main themes that you've come across in your work and in your studies, because I know we touched upon that you were a keynote speaker too, and you do a lot of public speaking. Do these themes cross over from avenue to avenue? Like, are you the themes that you talk about in your practice are the same things that you say in your public speaking, or are they kind of like separate entities?
I'd say they're a little bit different because when you're a keynote speaker, you're talking to a broad audience. Where when you're a consultant, you're working on just that organization or just that project or just that specific need. So it's a much broader audience. But when I'm doing keynotes, you want to talk about differentiating yourself and making sure that your address is memorable, but also helpful. I tell a lot of stories. So it's a lot of storytelling. And I have this one keynote in particular. It's called Change is Not a Four-Letter Word. And it's so for people who might be on the more resistant side to change. And so I tell a lot of stories, and the stories basically can be summed up under the category of Amy screwed up. And so I tell these stories about what I did that might not have gone as well as it could have, or where I just really, really had a bad decision and we learned from it, or I learned from it. But those stories are a good way for people to say, oh, this is funny. She really did screw up. But then they start self-reflecting and saying, oh, am I doing this? Right? Am I falling back into bad habits? So I have like a falling back into bad habits story. So, does that story help people realize that maybe they have regressed a little bit in something that they were trying to move forward? So it's very different, speaking on change versus leading change versus studying change. Like I said, there are overlaps, but it's really different. You're on stage, you're an entertainer. Um, and when you're a consultant, you best not be entertaining, right? You best be getting the work done.
That's a great way to put it, and I think bringing some humility to it as well, Amy. You do a good job at that. I think that when talking about those like keynotes, like being a keynote speaker, is something Joe and I obviously have no experience doing, but to hear about it is really interesting, and I think that it also differentiates you as a consultant as well because people will see you as somebody who knows a lot about a specific topic or multiple topics depending on how many different talks you've given.
Hmm.
One question that just comes from me on that is for people who are trying to like go on their own and open up like a consulting firm,
Hmm.
like are there certain, I guess, like do's and do nots to like differentiate yourself as a consultant when you try to go on your own? Like, do you have any just off the top of your mind that would play a role to help people try to go on their own or what they should know?
think the most important thing to remember is there is enough work for all of us. And trying to put someone else down to make yourself look better first of all, it's really poor form and probably going to bring you some bad karma. But that's a unnecessary tactic. And I know it's a very common tactic, particularly in some places and in some industries. But you don't need to do that. And I would also say, like, there are people who do what I do that I know, and they're a part of my network. Because sometimes if we have a project that's too big, we can subcontract to one another. If we have a project that doesn't fit into our portfolio, either because of something very specific or maybe timing, we're already busy, we can refer business to each other. And so I would say really kind of the first don't is don't harm others and to try to give yourself a competitive advantage, because it's just not going to work very well. I would say the other thing is when you're trying to best choose your service offering and what you're going to be good at, make sure it's going to be something that you really want to do. There are so many things that we do in corporate America or even in academia. But if you're good at three things, make sure you don't choose the one that you don't love a lot. Right? Choose the one that you really like and you're going to be energized by. Because when you are running your own business, like it is your 24/7. It's your face, it's your content, it's your thought leadership, it's your reputation. At the end of the day, it's your paycheck. And so, like, when it can become all consuming, make sure you're really interested in and energized by what you choose as your primary service offering.
We were given the advice once of like try to find the intersection of what you're good at and what you really like, and that'll help you choose what you should end up doing in your following career path. And I think it is great advice because I tell this joke to my parents a lot, but I was like, if I did exactly what I liked, I'd probably be like a zookeeper or something, or I'd be working with animals, and I would love to do it. Um, but what I'm good at is something totally different. So I got to find something that I really am good at, and that I really like. Hopefully, my career will be fulfilling, and I feel like research shows that. So I 100% agree in that sentiment, because if you don't really like what you do, then what's the point of doing it at the end of the day? We talked about on previous podcasts about if you just chase the salary, it leaves you so unfulfilled. And we probably have a whole episode just about that in general. It really is true. And I know you just gave us a one piece of great advice, but you think you could sum it up in one more piece of great advice for just prospective students or early career practitioners?
Yes. And I had a minute to think about this. So I'm glad that this question was at the end. When I do my goal setting seminars and when I work with people, either in large groups or one on one, on their goals, particularly their career goal, because you asked me a career question, it's to begin with the end in mind. And so, to the extent possible for the two of you today, what seat do you want to sit in on the day that you pack your box and on the day that you head off into full retirement? What seat is that? Either the organization or working for your own organization? Is there a title you want? Is there something that you want to achieve or have been known for? Right? Because you've got a lot of time between today and that last day. So, with thinking of the end in mind, what do you need to do along the way? Right? What are the milestones you need to set for yourself? Right? You've already got really close, right? Or very close to graduating. So you already will have your master's degrees. But what comes next? Like, I know mom and dad want us to have a job, and I get that. But when you choose the job, how will that job choice contribute to the end and the last day? How will the projects that you're taking on, the people you ask to mentor you, the promotions you seek, whether or not y'all want to move, geographic location, every big move should be strategic and fuel that last day. Keep in mind that last day is going to change several times between now and when you get there. But if you know where you're going, then you're going to be so much better laser focused and fulfilled too, right? Joe, to your point earlier, what you're doing every day will be more fulfilling because you know what it's leading to.
That's Wonderful advice. I'm sitting here in my brain answering all the questions that you just asked us because
I
I'm
was
like,
doing the
oh,
same thing.
I need to, and I'm still caught off guard by thinking about Joe working at a zoo. So there's a
Talk
whole
about that at
lot to
another
unpack
time.
here. But Amy, I thought I thought that was absolutely wonderful advice, and I think every question you ask there, students or early career practitioners can gain some knowledge from and some
Mhm.
self reflection on to really
Right.
think about where they fit in their careers. And, it really shows not only your knowledge and skill, but also just your experience speaking through just like what you've been able to tell us today. We want to
Good.
also make sure we give you the opportunity to highlight anything that you have going on by the time this episode comes out so we can make sure people tune in. We mentioned you have a podcast, but like that
I
and
do.
anything else that you would like to mention, like now's your time. So we would love to have that for you.
Well, I have some really fun speaking engagements coming up in May. The podcast, however, we haven't talked about the podcast at all, which is good. We have a limited amount of time. But if you go to DBA, so Doctorate of Business Administration, chronicles.org, you can get access to the podcast. It's on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Fountain. All of our full library of episodes are there. We also have a blog that we put out on alternating Thursdays. Podcast drops every Thursday, and would just love for people to tune into that. The intent of the podcast was to provide a resource for the Doctorate of Business Administration community, but also to bring awareness of the degree into industry and the practitioners. And so we have some really incredible guests. One of our upcoming guests is the CEO of a very large medical practice here on the East Coast. We're excited to have him. We have an upcoming guest who has a syndicated podcast on mental health and wellness. He's an HR person. So I fully expect the two of you to turn into that episode. So that is the best way to find us on the podcast. And of course, if anybody wants to connect with me, LinkedIn is the best place. I know that you will be probably tagging my LinkedIn profile, but I'm the original Amy Horner on LinkedIn. So / Amy Horner, you can find me there.
As always, we'll make sure to put all that stuff in
Of
the
course.
LinkedIn, the podcast link, and everything. We do have to maybe have a part two just on your podcast because it is a
Oh
really,
yeah.
it is a really cool part of your whole journey and experience. But of course, we don't have all the time in the world. But it would be lovely to talk about that as well.
Sure.
But thank you for joining us. It was a really fun episode. We appreciate you coming on today.
Thank you.
Yeah, this was great. Thank you so much, Amy. That was a fun episode with Amy, Joe. It's always a pleasure when we get other podcast hosts on here because one, we get some tips and tricks that we learn that can help us out, but also it's just like you can tell that they're very knowledgeable about whatever their field is, whether that's her or Ben Butina, or we had JP on here. Like always having podcast guests is always a good time.
No, yeah, especially Amy. She had so many great experiences, and I feel like she's coming from like her experiences kind of mirror ours. Like academia, she has a practitioner life and a podcast life. So it's cool hearing her perspective on certain aspects of the workforce and trying to combine all the three, which I feel like me and you try to do sometimes. So it was very interesting to hear just like what she's done so far.
This episode provided a lot that she could really speak to advice wise that really could like walk the walk, talk the talk type of advice because she was out here telling us all this stuff and like you could hear how busy just when you gave her the intro how busy she is. So it's really cool to hear and see like all of that happening for her.
Yeah, we're gonna definitely be watching and listening to some of her podcasts, taking down a couple of notes and including it in our own show because whatever she's doing, it's working. But thank you everybody for listening. We will well, we hope you liked it, and we will catch you next week.